Welcome to Strength Chat Podcast, presented by Kabuki Strength. Introducing your hosts, Chris Duffin, the mad scientist of strength, Rudy Cadlow, mature athlete and coach, and the wizard of training himself, Brandon Sen.
Welcome to Strength Chat with your host, the mad scientist of strength. Yes, that's right, myself. Also with me today, not phoning in, showing up, no red face or anything.
You embarrassed me. My face will turn red.
How many comments did we get on Instagram about your face from that photo that was taken
about,
on the last one?
You better have your blood pressure checked.
Dr. Rudolph, and of course, my friend, my coach, the wizard of training, Brandon Sen. How's that Starbucks over there?
Not enough. I'll tell everyone a very good life hack for Starbucks.
What's
if
that?
You get cold brew. One, you can get these in 30 ounces. Number two, you can tell them without water, and they'll put just pure concentrated cold brew in there.
And that'll light you up.
You get about 25% more cold brew.
Didn't you do that like the other day by accident and didn't sleep for like 2 days?
Well, I went to Starbucks, and the lady goes, I told her what I wanted. And she goes, okay. She comes back because I told her I want a Trenta cold brew with no room. She comes back and she goes, oh, did you say you didn't want that without? Did you want that without water? And I was like, well, sure. It's like 5 p.m. I didn't sleep all night.
I think I needed some of that last week with all my projects I took on. I went on. Anybody that follows my social media saw pictures of like the desert and some painted hills and all sorts of fancy stuff from Eastern Oregon. I spent the whole weekend driving around in my big giant like monster truck.
Not your Leaf.
Not my Leaf. And of course, in typical fashion, because I had too much on my plate last week, I also decided to rip out the whole undercarriage of the rig that mounts the suspension and the engine and transmission.
I hear that's important.
It is important. And so we literally put it in like 5 minutes before we left. It was never, you were out there already. Like,
I was amazed. And when you say we, mostly Jesse.
You didn't. No, I was up till like 10, 11 o'clock the night before welding in the back.
They're throwing stuff in the back of the truck, getting ready to leave, and Jesse's still under there trying to tighten the bolts. And I said, are you guys taking the trailer? So, oh, yeah, Jesse, remember to tighten the wheel on that trailer because it almost fell off last time. And I'm going, and they're leaving in the next 2 minutes. Oh, my, this is going to end bad. How did it end?
It was just fine.
Okay,
it was just fine. It was just fine. We only got like one bolt to hold the transmission in before we left, but I was in too much of a hurry. So we're like, screw it. I guess I don't get on the gas too hard while I'm gone. But I made it. Yeah. All right, well, today we've got Dave Tate on. So I'm sure most of our listeners know who Dave is, so I'll give a brief intro. But he is the founder of EliteFTS. He has been a competitive powerlifter, a coach in the field, as well as not just on training, but in regards to business, mentorship. So huge in that side of the thing. And, listeners probably are very aware of who Dave is, also because I have been writing for the site as well for the last several years, so I was really proud to be part of the EliteFTS team. And one of the things that really brought me or drew me to EliteFTS is the motto, live, learn, and pass on. Like, those are words that, you can live by, and, it really speaks volumes. But welcome to Strength Chat, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So we thought we would start by grilling Dave on one of the things he's really involved with is helping outfit gyms. So professional teams, collegiate teams, and also those of us, striving and trying to make, our own training centers around the U.S. and hack out a living. And it can be a challenge. It can be scary, like, when people decide to do that. Usually people are starting as a trainer and kind of progressing on and reach this point of like, hey, I want to start a gym. And Dave obviously equips a lot of these facilities with EliteFTS. But one of the things that I've really loved Dave for, I've heard numerous stories where somebody has gone to Dave with this, hey, this is what I want to do. And Dave said, no, you shouldn't. Or you need to rethink that. And not just like, You're basically kicking a bunch of sales to the side because you know that they're not ready for it, or or they don't have a good business plan. And that's huge, Steve. The fact that you're, not focused on like what I can move today out of your company, but like what you're building within the community and making sure that you're selling to somebody that's going to be successful. So tell us what, when you're doing those, mentoring some of those people, like what are the pitfalls? What are the things that you're seeing that are driving you to, perhaps give that type of feedback?
I try to, when you're in business, you have to know what business you're really in. So EliteFTS, for example, is in the business of helping, people who would place training as one of their top 4 priorities in their life. We take those people and we help them become stronger. And that could be through the education we provide and the products that we put out there. The education is a driver of the products. We don't charge for the education. So we're in the business of helping those people become stronger. And I define those people because when you're talking about making training a top 4 priority, people can misconstrue that sometimes if they're trying to put it together in their own head. Where if I use an example of powerlifters, which we're known for sponsoring powerlifters, not all powerlifters fit within our market. Not all powerlifters are going to put the sport as one of their top 4 priorities. If they're a beginner powerlifter and they're a laser tag lifter or whatever you want to call it, they're just trying the sport out and they're in and they're out, it's really just a hobby for them. It's not something that they take that serious. So they're really not our market. Where people who are making a living off training, coaches, physical therapists, powerlifters to some degree, when it fits that top 4 priority, that's our target market. And that's who we've always had on the site, and we're working on close to 20 years now. But that's why we always had strength coaches, powerlifters, bodybuilders, all these different elements of experts on the website, because those are the people that we want to bring together to help educate other people. Now, the people we're educating, they may be working with the beginners and so forth. So now there's other companies that would be in our industry that they're really in the business of manufacturing and creating jobs. So while we share the same space, we're not really in the same business. So when I'm speaking to somebody or I'm listening to somebody talk to me about what they want to do, and it could be opening a gym, it could be online training, it could be a hodgepodge of a bunch of different, usually it's a bunch of different things that are just kind of scatterbrained all over the place. I'm trying to figure out what business they really want to be in, and then what connects the dots best for that. That takes a little bit higher understanding of business, or what I like to call zero understanding of business. When you kind of have partial understanding of business is when you kind of get screwed up and confused and you start following, the path of other people, which leads kind of to your own demise and so forth. So I see a lot of those. That's where I see the disconnect is I'll hear it and I'll hear it and I'll hear it. And a lot of times it just sounds repetitive of what somebody else is doing. And you don't want to do that if you're in business. You can be unique. You can be different than other people and still be in the same market and sell the same goods and completely be in different businesses. We've seen it over and over and over, and not be competitors, actually work with each other. It's amazing how that works when they understand what business each person's really in. So I kind of answered the question, but
no, I think that's really good because and actually you and I have had a little bit of offline conversations on that in the past, but everybody needs to cash a check and make a living and support their families, but oftentimes why are we doing what we're doing? And people lose sight of that, and if they lose sight of it, you could go down a whole lot of different paths, and you need to be true and authentic to yourself. And and that's like you said, live, learn, and pass on. You're talking about education. I mean, that's exactly fitting your philosophy. And I think we had this conversation. I did a podcast with someone else last year and talked about the 3 pillars that define Kabuki strength. And you shot me an email like saying, "Hey man, that was just really amazing. Like, love the succinct and understanding who you are." And you're like saying a lot of business people don't have that, and they're focused on, just the business side, the numbers, the crunching,
Yeah, and you have to have that because as you know, this shit is not easy. It's anytime you get involved in the business, you find out real quick you've bit off way more than you can chew. And it doesn't get any better. It just gets worse. You just become more tolerable of it. So you don't stress about the things you used to stress about 5 years ago. You actually kind of laugh about them. But 5 years ago, I was like, oh, shit, I'm fucked. Now you see other people going through it, and it's like, it's not that big of a deal. But if you don't have that ingrained reason, and I hate to use the word why because it's kind of overused, but if you don't have that internal reason, then you're not going to be able to weather the storms. And in my opinion, there's way more storms than there is, nice sunny days. And if there's not, then you're not doing the right things. You're becoming a little bit too complacent.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's why I'll use it, get under the bar to lift weights, is to apply stress to our body so that we grow, learn, and adapt. And the same thing we should be doing with, our mental selves, what we're doing with our life, our career, our how we're challenging and growing. Right? You've got to apply some stress to be able to grow and be better.
And
unless you're one of those people, some people want to just come and punch a clock, and that's okay. I guess for them.
But when you own a business, you really don't have to apply the stress. Trust me, it will come to you.
Yeah,
it kind of comes all on its own. You don't need to create it; it'll be there.
What? I don't know what you're talking about. We're completely stress free over here. I don't.
Yeah.
So succinctly, what you're saying is that you can be an expert in a. You can be a great power lifter, or you can be a good bodybuilder, but it doesn't mean you're going to be a good businessman. I mean, the old saying is, you need to be a jack of all trades and a master of none if you're really going to be successful in life. So I think that's something that you guys have applied.
Yeah. There needs to be, I feel, I mean, it kind of goes against pop culture to a certain degree. There needs to be a certain level of obsession.
Yep.
An imbalance, or you're screwed. It's
imbalance for sure. Exactly. Everybody wants to preach, moderation. If you're going to be, happy and successful, but you're not going to do like amazing, cool things like starting EliteFTS and having the impact that you've had, like on the strength training community, if you don't have some level of obsession, right?
You have to, because it's you can't just walk away in the middle of a project that you're booming away at, And if you can, then maybe you're not doing the right project. You understand what I'm saying, but it's kind of hard to articulate sometimes, with other people because, first off, nobody's going to be as engaged in the business that you own than you are, So that's kind of a given fact, and. So with that understanding, you need to understand, staff aren't going to be that way. So there's a whole different dynamic on how you go about motivating staff, keeping staff, hiring staff, all the other kind of stuff. But when it comes to the business owner, I don't like to use the word entrepreneur because to me that signifies somebody that owns multiple businesses. And if you're a business owner, I've had the same business for 20 years. I don't think I'm a fucking entrepreneur. I'm not launching startups left and right. I'm a business owner. And, with that, there's been times I didn't sleep for 3 or 4 days, and there's been other times I slept straight for 3 or 4 days. But execution, I think, kind of gets overlooked. It doesn't matter how you get it executed, but it does have to get done. And sometimes to get things done, you're not going to find that balance. You need to be a little fucked up in the head, to be able to do it. Priorities need to shift, and it seems to become the more and more I'm speaking to the people that you're talking about, the ones that want to start gyms and start their own companies, their main goal is to try to find work that's going to be able to create better balance in their life. And it's work for somebody else. I mean, if you seriously just want balance, work for somebody else.
Exactly. It removes a lot of those stresses. And then it's interesting. I've known several people that have started gyms, right, because of similar type reasons, and then end up getting frustrated because they just realize oh, all I'm doing now is working to pay the bank to pay for the lease and the loan on all the equipment that I took. It's just another job. Like,
Yeah.
it didn't
They're
provide
working
you any
twice,
sort of
yeah.
freedom, and actually probably took some freedom away.
Yeah, they're working twice as long for half as much.
Yep.
So if you're not really obsessed about what you're doing, then that's not going to work. And so that's where I get to the talking people out of it. And I remember speaking to you and a lot of different people. I'm a very realist when it comes to this, just to make sure that everybody knows this is what you're getting into. It's not great. And I paint a really black picture, probably blacker than what I should, but I'd rather be that super negative dick when somebody is starting. So that way, when it's good, they're like, wow, this is actually kind of better than what he said it was going to be. And then, run in with all these false expectations that they're going to be making tons of money and right off the bat, and it's going to be easy and it's going to be stress free and it's going to be great. And because it's just not the case.
You mentioned hiring and firing, but there are so many things involved in running a business, and I'm sure that you could share a dozen things that people don't think about when they get into business that they need to know. What advice would you give to a young person getting into the business and the things and the steps and the skill sets they need to acquire?
I really think if they take the time to establish what their core values are, that goes a long, long, long way. And that's when I work with people, I'll have them sit down and think of 10 people in their life that have made a positive impact and have them write those names down and then write why. Just 1 or 2 sentences, nothing big. Then we'll go and write 10 people that had a negative influence. And then 3 or 4 sentences of why. And then get on Google. And now this is over a period of hours, by the way, because I really want them to think about it. And because I don't care if it's a cartoon character, a fictional character in a book, a person, a coach that just said 1 sentence. Everybody can think of somebody. And some people have no positive influences. It's all negative. But that's cool too, because that will work. Then just get on Google and search for a list of core values and try to find a page. There's several that have 100 values, not some short 10 value page, but a lot of words, fortitude, just something that's got a lot of words. And then define each one of those statements that you've written down as far as those values go. And what you're going to see are the values that you were either inspired by, or in other words, those values were put into you as a child, probably before you were 16 years old, and you grew up and became who you are in spite of or despite of those values. So once you know what they are and you can define them, and you can do it at a personal level, if it's just the average person listening, and if you're doing it as a company, you're going to do it as a personal level, but take that statement, I call it, take it from a me statement to a we statement. Then you're going to write a defining statement for each one. So if you have those 8, 10, 7 defining core values, they're going to define what your company is. And that's going to be who you are. That's the blueprint of you. Outside of DNA and everything that happens at a cellular level, that's the social imprint that's been put on you from your social environment. So if you look at those values, then you start thinking about stresses that you've had in your life. It's usually a violation of one of those values. So if you can establish a business to where you operate based upon those core values, understanding that you're not always going to be perfect. It's kind of like an equalizer where you got 0 in the middle, -10, +10 for each one of the values. That's always kind of moving to get the right sound. Something's going to be a little low, something's going to be a little bit high. But if it gets a little too fucked up, say it's -5 and I'm trying to think of a value, fortitude, I suppose. Let's just say that's one of it. And it's a -5 and it's a -5 and you don't realize it, you don't bring it back to baseline, then that -5 will become your new 0. And you don't want that to happen. This is kind of like a check and balance system for how your business will operate. And it's an amazing tool because when you get yourself into situations where you don't know what to do, like, should I do this opportunity or should I not? And you look at those values, I will guarantee, because I've done it and seen it happen so many times, the answer's staring right in your face. It's right there. You know, you just need reminded of it. And as a company, when you have those and they're documented, and it's not just words that are on a wall that somebody made up or a PR firm made up, because this is you. You know, it's your social imprint. You're going to reduce your stress. You're going to make better decisions. You're going to turn down opportunities that may have made you a lot of money, but now you know why you turned it down, instead of taking opportunities that may make you a lot of money, but create too much stress in the long term. That is probably the best tool that I've ever been taught and have ever used, because it influences your hiring decisions. Because if you're trying to bring in your staff, you want to bring in people that are going to fit each one of those values. So you may have somebody that's really, really strong on one, but not so strong on some of the others. So the cool thing with staff is you can bring in top performers at each one of those values, and you don't necessarily have to have the person that fits every single one of them. You know, that kind of ties into what their job description is going to be. And now, with this in mind, keep in mind things like integrity and trust, and these are values that are not self-defined. You can't put these on your list. You know, your people who know you will define you. You can't say I'm a person of integrity. It just doesn't work that way. You know,
Trust me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the market will define that. So those are kind of like your the grade on the top of the paper. You know, that signifies, are you living by all those other values? Because integrity, really, in my opinion, is always doing the right thing, even when you think it's going to hurt you, you know, financially or some other way, but you still did the right thing regardless of that. And that's kind of really more a gauge of integrity than anything else. And you're not one to define that. You know, the world defines that upon you, or your friends and family and so forth define that upon you. So it can't be one of your values. Everybody wants to put honesty, integrity, and all this other stuff. You can put trustworthiness because you can control that, you know, but some of the other things are not really within your control.
Yeah. Well, I want to change directions a little bit, you know.
That's good stuff, though.
It was.
That's great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Actually, that is a pretty cool exercise. I would definitely recommend people do that.
Even people not interested in opening businesses.
Exactly.
I think anyone who wants to perform in any, you know, sector, whether that's you want to improve in your athletics, powerlifting, strongman, weightlifting, you know, specifically in our field or elsewhere, it sounds like it would be a really good opportunity.
It's good to know who you are and what you stand for.
A lot of people don't.
They don't, and you can see it, and they become willing, like, all over the place. So, Yep. So, you've been around for, well, not you, but EliteFTS for 20 years. And, you know, to be successful doing that, you've clearly got to be able to see and anticipate trends that are going on in the industry. So I'd like to get, you know, your thoughts on, like, where we see, like, shifts with either training and actually, like, equipment particularly. Like, you know, we've got new equipment hitting the market. We've got equipment that have been, like, cornerstone products that are around a long time. Some of them may be drifting off. What are some of the things that you see changing in that regard?
Equipment is always kind of a slow changing environment, unlike something that's really fast, like apparel. I mean, apparel you can get behind really quick and you're screwed, because fashion is, you know, there's no way anybody in the fitness industry is going to stay on top of fashion trends. You know, hopefully we get a t-shirt design people like, you know, 1 out of every 6 or 7, but that moves very fast. Equipment moves a little bit slower. Your company's moving in the right direction of, you know, I don't want to call it functionalized equipment, but equipment that's designed to better accommodate the demands of training, because a lot of equipment is just, I don't want to say it's archaic, because it has lasted, you know, the test of time. You know,
Right. Yep.
a barbell's been a barbell, you know, forever. But a lot of times that gets taken for granted that, oh, it's just a barbell, or, oh, it's a plate. And it becomes commoditized to where it's so much easier for every company just to import because you just can't make it in the States for less than what it's going to take to come in. But a lot of those products sometimes become archaic in the form that it's still 50, 60, you know, how many years old without any redesigned thought as far as biomechanics, you know, kinetic awareness, you know, just bone structure. I mean, it's like a kettlebell, for example. You know, it was a bell they just threw a handle on, you know, for whatever reason. And, you know, everybody keeps beating the fuck out of their forearms. Well, you ever think that maybe that was not designed with any type of biomechanics in mind? It was designed how many years ago, 100 years ago, or whatever it is. So, you know, companies like yours are kind of on the forefront of that little niche, and it is a niche, but it's going to become a little bit bigger niche because that's what you're doing. You're looking at those products and saying, okay, why has it been the same? And that's the Duffalo bar is a great example of what I'm speaking about there, where now all of a sudden you take something that's been standard for so long. Why? You know, nobody's really asked why. Now you're asking why, you know, which is a great question to ask because the why doesn't really fit the mold when you start to look at shoulder, you know, the number of shoulder injuries and damage and all the other kind of stuff. So I think we're going to see more of that, but I think with that, we're going to see a lot of really stupid shit emerge too. By people
you definitely see a lot of that all the time. Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think we're going to see a scaling down, you know, economizing of just a lot of the basic equipment, you know, just from a size standpoint. You know, gyms are becoming smaller and smaller. Boxes are becoming a little bit smaller and smaller. People want more and more floor space to be able to do speed work, mobility work, and that kind of stuff. So racks may become smaller, you know, to be able to accommodate this. So, and that, I guess a rig would be a good example.
Yep.
Of, you know, going from an 8-rack setup into a rig. And so that's a subset. Then on the other subset, you got the people that still want the biggest, baddest freaking rack that can ever be made, you know, to the point of, you know, 4x4, you know, steel that's a half an inch thick, which is completely overkill. But
there's got to be a need for that, Dave.
Right?
Just,
like 300 pounds per post makes a lot of sense, but it's not going to move. So that's kind of where I see that going. It's a little bit easier to stay on the trends with that because quality is always going to reign. So when you start dealing with strength equipment that's used on a day-to-day basis, you know the insurance cost of just a simple bar, you know. And so the trick that comes in is, you know, you want to buy from quality suppliers who are vetted and insured, because if not, you know, if something happens in your gym, you're the one that's going to get fucked, and it's not going to be able to bounce back. But at the same time, in the marketplace, as you know, there's a lot of people who will sell that are not insured. Mm-hmm. And they're selling for way lower than what you're selling it for, and you can't understand why until you start figuring out that their operational costs don't include one of the biggest costs of all. And that's their risk, but they fly under the radar until something happens. Then when it happens and they get sued, they're fucked because, you know, they don't have the insurance to help cover them from that. So from that standpoint, quality is always going to reign superior. You know, it's from a buyer's perspective, at least the buyers that my target is. Yep. You know, there's always going to be a need for, you know, really, really cheap garage equipment, and that's always going to be there.
Yeah, you're not going to, you can't fight against it. I mean, if people are going to buy some cheap China stuff, I mean, like, you know, and their bar's going to bend to 400 pounds, that's just the way you're not going to be able to convince that person to go, hey, you know, you should be dumping $600 on a bar. But there's a market. Like I said, the people that know and use equipment know what the quality is for sure and what it means.
Yeah. And I think that's going to continue. The accessory market, I think, it's still untapped a little bit, as far as, cable attachments and that kind of stuff. And I call that kind of the garage market sector, because a lot of people come up with some really cool stuff. They just don't know what to do with it. And some of it is, you may get some of the same emails that I get. Some of you are like, oh my God, because they don't know what they're doing. They think they got the greatest product in the world. They want you to pay for it. And meanwhile, they never had you sign a non-disclosure, which, by the way, if you're one of these people doing that, you're fucking stupid.
Exactly. Yes. You get an NDA. Yes.
Yeah. If you're going to show a product to a supplier and see if it's a cool idea and you don't have an NDA, it's your ass. If they rip it off, it's completely it's your fault, not theirs.
I mean, it's obviously it's not something that we would do, and I doubt anything that you would do. And I think like our relationship with Donnie probably speaks to that as well. That we co-develop some products, and he receives dividends off of those. We could have just made it and sold it, and not done that, right? But yeah, I mean, I get those all the time. People sending me emails or messages on social media. Hey, I've got this great idea, and here it is. Anybody can.
And you know how much an idea is worth, zero. But yeah, it's a weird market, because over the 20 years that I've been in it, it kind of expands and constricts, and it's not necessarily tied to the economy. And with the target market that I have, it's not really, I don't get hit by recessions and so forth, because when it's the top 4 priority, it's not going to be cut out. Mm-hmm. But just overall in general, there's still some constriction and expansion that happens throughout the market sector. And being a retailer, we do produce our own goods, but at the same time, we resell probably the majority of the goods. So that's what we see is when it starts to expand, we start to see an influx of new products coming from all the suppliers, kind of all at the same time. And I don't know why. I haven't been able to figure that out, because I'd love to be able to project when, because then we could reach out, help, or, have more cash on hand for inventory. I mean, you just don't know.
Right.
But then when it constricts hard, and it's not seasonal. So it's just a weird thing. I don't know. I'm still trying to, after 20 years, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to get a pulse on it.
Well, when you got that figured out, don't be afraid to pass that along. Okay. So
I will pass it on to all of our suppliers, because we need you guys to keep making new product.
Well, we certainly have a lot on the way, but it's not. It's your podcast today. So, but I think it was interesting. Yeah, the comment about some of the shrinkage of the racking and equipment out there, and I can definitely see that as people begin to value space. You're going to get less of these, that bodybuilder gym where it's just packed with equipment. People want to have a mixture of the open space and equipment, and trying to find that balance. So
yes.
Yeah.
Any machine that's good for one movement is pretty much going to be history soon. It's got to be universal. It's got to have more uses than just one. So like a selectorized chest press machine. I mean, now you and I could probably come up with 100 movements, but most people are going to see one or two movements.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Well, with the equipment being a little bit more slow changing and, quality reigning supreme, what do you think about from what you've seen in training methods over the years? So, when you first started out back in the West Side days and stuff, obviously powerlifting, strength sports was a lot different than it is now. From where it's been to where it's going, what do you think the future holds? Do you think the pendulum's going to swing back to some of those old school training styles, or where do you see that headed?
I think it already has, because I've gotten in the sport, or I got in the sport in '83. So the powerlifting, I just use powerlifting as a reference here instead of sport. They're all different realms. So sport training, it doesn't follow the same path as powerlifting. So if I just use powerlifting, it's a simple example that's a very easy to understand process. Sport training's always kind of been a little, actually it is way more complex. But when I started powerlifting in '83, everything was linear periodization. And then people would start to break on it a little bit because it wasn't working for them very well. So it would become what some would call undulating periodization, or in some ways even block periodization. But it was still some type of form of a linear periodized approach. And then through the 90s, conjugate became very popular. And I think that was because Louis was one of the first, if not the first, to actually come out and share everything. You know, you would see workouts of the month in Powerlifting USA, and other people would share stuff, but it would be one lift without the accessories. Louis came straight out and said, here's everything that we do. Go ahead and do it. You know, and if it works for you, great. If it don't, then you're not doing it right. You know, that's kind of Louis' approach. So that became really popular, and now I think we're starting to see that segue back. Then it kind of moved into block. Now we're starting to see that segue back into more linear modes, you know, with the nonlinear and that kind of thing. So we are seeing that. Now, will it, you know, go back into conjugate? Possibly, but a lot of people have a misconception that conjugate means powerlifting and geared powerlifting, where it doesn't. You know, it stems from Olympic weightlifting, and Verkhoshansky was using it with other kind of athletes. People don't really understand what conjugate really is. And the video series that I just made last month, I believe, was all the misconceptions people have. And this is just on Westside. On Westside training, they're taking what they see now, or what other people are saying is Westside training now, and thinking that's how it always was. When I was there between 90 and 2005, we never trained in gear. We just put the gear on when we went to a meet. So you can't say it's made for geared training when we never trained in it. And all the coaches that came to visit didn't use gear for their teams either. But they also didn't exactly do what we were doing as powerlifters. They were using, you know, a concurrent or a conjugate method with their athletes. The method, not the actual program that we were using. So it could return, but there's a lot of strong bias out there still that it is just for geared lifting, which is kind of hurting the return back to that,
right?
Because it's a false bias is what it is. So it may or may not. You know, when I work with coaches, it's more along the lines of, I know what my bias is. You know, I have a bias. I work with a coach to try to help them uncover what their own actual philosophy is. Because a lot of times coaches that I'm going to be working with that have been around for 5, 10, 15, sometimes 20 years, they know 80% of what they need to know. But too many times they're willing to just throw it all out the fucking window to jump on what's new and what's popular. If I can extract that 80% of what they know, and I'll use this big conference table I have out here and have them write it all down, and then say a corner's left open, then I help them, let's figure out what you don't know. You know, what you don't even know, and spend your time learning that, because if you learn that, you already have the other 80% figured out. Why dump everything that you spent 20 years learning, you know, when really all you need to do is to build the stuff that you've been avoiding learning for the past 20 years because either you don't like it or you don't care about it, or, you know, a lot of times that's going to be, you know, more injury prevention based because nobody's ever really wanted to address that. It depends. You know, each person's a little bit different. So kind of a long-winded answer, but it is what it is. You know,
that last several minutes there is really, really key, I think. Like understanding what you know and not just tossing everything out because, again, we've got this fancy system. Whatever's popular at the time, we're just going to run with that and ditch. Like I see that all the time. And,
yes.
You know, getting a good understanding like what you know and don't and focusing on, you know, cleaning up those areas. You know, you may never be an expert in any of those fields, but you should have an understanding and solidify your knowledge base without a doubt.
Yeah, athletes should do what they're told. Coaches should follow the path of other great coaches. You know, not just do what other great coaches say to do. if they followed the same path those coaches did as far as learning and understanding and, making mistakes. And obviously you can learn from other coaches' mistakes. It'd be stupid not to, especially at this point, because I think we're dealing with a generation that's got some of the most educated coaches that we've ever had in the history of strength sports. So with the bad, too much knowledge, also comes the good, a lot of really good knowledge. It's just a matter of teaching people how to vet out what that knowledge is. But that's not just a strength and conditioning problem. That's a problem that we all face with our kids. As schools teach, right? Well, as parents, we have to teach our kids how to use Google. How do you search information on the internet, know what's good, know what's not? Because they could just search something on YouTube and some babbling bobblehead, says this is right and they believe it, but they don't know how to vet it.
Are you saying that there's no flat Earth?
Well,
I saw a YouTube video, man. It was pretty convincing.
If it's on the internet, it must be convincing. If it's on the internet, it must be true.
Put yourself as an 8-year-old kid, a 6-year-old kid, with a parent that's not showing them how to vet information online, because it's not being done in the schools. But in the schools, they showed us how to use, the Dewey Decimal System, right? And how to vet information out in the library, but it's not being taught of how to vet information online, where, that's our job. That's kind of how I see our job, is to be able to say, here's reliable sources, here's fun sources. Maybe there's some good stuff in there, but it's more infotainment than it is educational material.
Well, and that gets right back to, being a coach, because there is so much, information out there on different methodologies and just some wacky stuff as well. And being able to know who and what to trust is of critical importance. I mean, vetting information is very important to learn how to do that.
And it starts with a basic understanding of how the body works. So if a lot of people would just step back and read a physiology book, a biomechanics book, just like a 101 college textbook, it would go so far as helping them with their bullshit detector. It's unbelievable. But most don't want to do that because they don't want to take the time. So they'd rather just fall for the bullshit that's out there. But a lot of it's, for us, it's easy to determine.
Sure. Dave, while we're focused on powerlifting as a sport, it's had its cycles, and, it wasn't long ago that 90% of the people that showed up at our meets were in gear. And today it seems like 90% of them are, or more, are raw. Is that a fundamental change that's here to stay, or do you think it's just a cycle? Will we see people getting back to geared lifting in the future?
I think the lifters determine that, and that's the one thing that I've learned through, I guess, that the sports learned from 2010 on, is from 83 until 2010, you didn't have any other way to enter a meet unless you went to Eric Talmadge's Raw Unity meet. There wasn't even a line on an entry form to enter Raw. So there was 30, 40 years where Raw world records were not even, there was no way anybody could even attempt to try to break them because there was no division for them. Then in 2010, that started to happen. Now, the interesting thing about this is from my quasi research, the sport really hasn't grown that much. So in the 70s, there might have been 12,000 unique lifters. In the 90s, right around 14,000. Up until 2 years ago, about 14,000. But there's been a big shift in the type of the lifters. Last year, there was 18,000, so there was a bit of a bump. I'm not counting high school powerlifters. There's probably more high school powerlifters in one state than there are competitive, unique lifters. But for some reason, they don't migrate into open competitions. It's very, very rare that they do. But the interesting thing with this migration into Raw is it certainly didn't help the companies or the corporations that supported powerlifting, the gear companies. It didn't help them at all. I mean, they're now not selling product. They're selling less product. And it certainly didn't help the federations, because most of the federations didn't have a raw division, so people were going overseas to compete raw, or basically really weird sanctions were doing it here. So we saw this change from probably 95% geared to 90 to 95% raw that went against the best interests of the corporations and the federations that support the sport, which means this could only happen for one reason, because the lifters control the sport. So when I see the lifters bitching about how bad the sport is and all this other stuff, I don't think they understand what they just did. They did something that's relatively impossible to do in any other sport organization. So they should take a lot of pride in what they did do, because they created the sport that they want. So if they wanted to go more geared, they have that power now. I think if they just think and realize what they did, they have the power to dictate who will be the strongest federation, who will have the best federation, and how people will compete. That's a huge progression forward for the sport. That I think is going to provide the launch pad for growth.
One thing I think, you said choosing which federations are going to grow. For a long time, it seemed like we just kept getting more and more federations and splitting. But in the last 2 to 3 years, it seems that it's very clear that a couple federations are becoming the most prominent. And I think that's good for the sport, getting a more common, approach, judging, record set, all that sort of stuff. And I never thought that would happen. Thinking back 10 or 15 years ago, you're like, oh no, that just can't happen. And we're starting to see it. So
it's starting to happen. And when I got in, there were 3 prominent federations, and it was all it was kind of determined where you competed based upon if you wanted to take a drug test or not. I mean, that was really the option that determined where you went. And I think we're going to get back there again to where that's going to be the biggest determining factor.
And that's what it looks
instead
like.
Instead of that being determined by type of gear used, it's going to fall back into just being determined by that. Where when I got in the sport, the gear used was kind of the same across the board, where Raw is kind of providing that same across the board right now. If they can figure out what they want to do with the knees. I do think they got to figure out and come to some kind of agreement on what that's going to be, so there's not different divisions. But as soon as they do that, to where the only choice is if you want to be drug tested or not, then you'll see 2 federations, and that will be it.
Yep.
We saw some pretty huge performances this past weekend at IPF Worlds, Dave. We had 2 guys squatting 1,000+ pounds in the super heavies. Do you think there was anyone back in the heyday of equipped powerlifting who would be able to stand up to those raw numbers right now?
That's such a tough question to answer, because you're looking at relative 1,300 pound squats, and it's just so much apples to oranges, because gear did aid the ability to how much one could lift, but it also was a skill that had to be learned. You couldn't just throw the shit on and use it like people think. Some people could never figure it out. I mean, it was a motherfucker. I mean, it was not easy. So a lot of time was spent on that. And when you start multiplying this gear into the equation of a training process, where you train powerlifters now. So imagine if you had to throw gear into your training program, but the only way that you were able to really dial in the gear was to have 90% plus poundages. And you had to work the skill of that gear. So now you got to have the repetitions in the gear to master the skill, because it is different. On the bench press, you got to kind of catch the flow to the bar, and you can't just do that automatically. You have to learn it. But the caveat is you have to learn it at 90% plus weights and not fuck up your training. So it became this very complex factor that kind of got dumped into the training, where, as I said, at Westside, we didn't even train in it because it was such that complex factor. And we figured, well, the stronger you got, the better carryover. And that was true for a decade. But then we started to realize people who were learning the skill of the gear were getting huge carryovers. And if we weren't learning the skill of the bencher, and I'm getting a 40-pound carryover and they're getting a 250-pound carryover, then that's my fault. I didn't learn the skill. And there's good and bad of that. The good is you can take somebody who's less genetically inclined that's willing to do the work and to do the skill work necessary to be better, can actually beat the person that's better genetically inclined, which has an aspect of being really cool and a very competitive sport aspect to it. But the harder aspect is how the fuck do you train it? And that what has became the issue. So I can't really answer the question because there's no way to really to do it. But I can say, based upon the records that we've seen broken from 2010 forward, because it started shattering records pretty quick, and it's only now starting to slow down a little bit. I think those records would have been broken sometime within that 40-year period that nobody was actually lifting raw. So would the records be higher than they are today? My gut tells me no, but they would have been broken consistently over the period of time.
Yeah, that's a great answer. One other thing while we're kind of wrapping up here that I'm mostly selfishly curious about is, being that you've been in the sport for decades, you've seen a lot of lifters come through, a lot of different styles of training and so forth. Of your entire span of being in this industry and sport, who is your favorite lifter? Someone not necessarily that you looked up to or, just someone who caught your eye the most throughout your career?
I got a few of them in there, and a lot of this is because I was there to see it, but there were certain lifts done at certain period of times that just changed the sport. Andy Bolton deadlifting 1,000 pounds was just amazing to watch. Steve Goggins squatting 1,100 pounds is just amazing to watch. So there's not, I don't have any specific lifter in mind because I never had any idols that were really lifters, so to say. But I think there's people that just broke these barriers that were unbreakable. Donnie totaling 3,000 pounds, stuff like that is just, to see it's amazing because you can't even fucking comprehend it. And now we're starting to see it happen with a lot of the raw, stuff as well. And it's amazing that, the one thing I often wonder is, would these guys today be lifting the numbers that they're lifting raw had the numbers already not been lifted in gear? So in other words, the mental barrier was kind of already broken down. Right. Like 1,000-pound squat really for a time being there when it was all gear, it wasn't a big deal. I mean, it's people in the 181s, 198s were hitting 1,000. I mean, it was typical. You'd see them all the time. So did that help prepare these guys to be able to squat 1,000 pounds raw today? Because you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. Nobody will ever know. It's just table talk bullshit, but it's interesting.
I definitely think it had to have. A lot of times we'll see this thing stand out in a lot of different sectors, and once someone finally reaches that, then 5 more people do it instantly. So I have to think that had to be some influence. What magnitude is probably impossible to tell, but absolutely I think had to have some influence.
Oh yeah.
I can say probably the biggest influence that I saw throughout my time was the WPO, and not the first years, but a couple years, the 2004, 2005, 2000, right around there, when the best of the best were coming together to lift. So you had a lot of single ply guys that were going into multi-ply. And when you put the best genetic freaks together on the same platform with other best genetic freaks, crazy shit happens. And then they're now in a situation to where they're lifting against somebody that just squatted 1,100 pounds and they're a 1020 squatter. And then next year they squat 1,100 pounds. They didn't put 80 pounds on their squat. They just saw some other fucker could do it, so why can't they? And when you put people together on the same stage at the same caliber at that high of a level, I still don't think we've seen the capabilities of what true raw lifters can do, because that rarely happens even today. And when that can start to happen more consistently, I think we're all going to sit back like, holy fuck, he just squatted 1,200 pounds. Who knows what they're going to do, but it's going to be shocking.
Right.
I've got a selfish question myself a little bit as a mature athlete, and I'll ask on behalf of our other mature strength athletes listening in. Dave, you've been under the bar for many years. What advice do you have to our more mature athletes to continue training as they age and to protect themselves? What advice do you have to keep people going?
Whatever your joint range of motion is that you have now, don't let it get worse. It's threshold. So go into threshold, come right out of threshold, but don't let it get worse. If you can increase it a little bit and you have good joint health, you're not bone on bone, then by all means, increase it. But just don't let it get worse. I know that sounds so simple, but that's what catches up with strength athletes that have been doing this for years. The training age is very high. You're never going to avoid wear and tear, no matter what you do. Wear and tear is going to add up, especially over the years. What you have to do is you have to be smart when that wear and tear actually does start to get very close to bone on bone or bone on bone, and not grind. That's when you really don't want to grind the shit out. You don't want to grind it, really at all, but that's when you can prolong it just by being smart and maybe not doing exercises that you're no longer capable to do within that joint, or restoring the best you can that joint range of motion. But just, there's nothing hardcore about a replacement. And sometimes you're going to have no other choice. But if you can put it off until you're 65 instead of 55 or 45, it's a hell of a lot better option. And you got nothing to prove if you're not competing anymore. So that would be my best piece of advice. You still have to do things. You still have to move, because that's the nature of arthritis. You quit moving, it gets worse. But it's a catch-22. If you're moving too much the wrong way, you're just going to grind the joint apart.
Great, thank you. Great answer.
Yeah. I think last thing I just wanted to touch on really quick before we close out. I know that you've been a sponsor of Make-A-Wish in Ohio for quite a number of years. But recently, you've been getting involved in increasing autism awareness. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
Yeah, that kind of came about indirectly. My son has Asperger's, or high-functioning autism. They keep changing how they define things. And a long story short, because the video's out there, I know that he's going to need some type of coping mechanism. And for me, training has always been my coping mechanism. And I may or may not have autism. Who knows? I'm not being tested. I am what I am. But he's definitely more autistic than I am. There's no doubt about it. So I wanted that for him, but I wasn't able to train him. And it was frustrating, because I should know this. I know all progressions and all this other stuff. But what I learned is, when you're dealing with populations like that, I call them regressions. It's like, if you can't get them to do a sit to stand, then how do you get them ready to do a sit to stand? I've never had to think about that before, because everybody can do a sit to stand, but not everybody can, for mental reasons or sometimes physical reasons. Where Sheena started working with him, and then over a period of years has had phenomenal progress with that. So we've been filming things here and there, and after a few years, it was more a matter of, do we have enough content to actually throw something together that could help other parents understand that the label's not a bad thing? I really struggled with that, because I was labeled through school, and really struggled with that. I can't express how much I struggled with that, because I didn't want my son labeled the same way nobody else does. But if it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have been able to get the support and the help that he gets now, which has made a profound difference in his life. And I see other people that have children on the spectrum that fight that label, and their kids are not getting that extra help. And it's not a prison sentence. It's the way for you to get extra help that it's needed. And that's why we did the video, was so much not about the awareness, so to say, but for other parents that may be in the same situation I was, to understand that the label's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a way to be able to get your child the help that he or she actually needs.
Where can people find that video at, Dave?
It's on YouTube at EliteFTS.com. just if you search EliteFTS.com autism, I'm sure it's going to pop up.
Excellent. All right. Do you gentlemen have any further questions?
Great stuff,
Yeah.
Dave. Thanks for taking the time, and we could go another hour with you,
Yeah.
and we'll circle back another time to pick up that next hour.
Great. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right.
Thanks for all you do.
Cool.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Dave.
you, Dave.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. Good stuff, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, my laptop is on 5%, so I'm going to
That's
have
perfect.
to cut you guys off.
All right.
I'm sitting here. I'm like, oh, fuck. I have a power cord. What are we going to do? But it worked out great, man. It was a good time.
Yep, it was. All right, get back to fighting
Okay.
those daily fires.
Fuck. I actually forgot about them. That was a good thing.
That's good. Yep.
Cool.
All right.
See you guys later.
Bye.
All right. Thanks for sharing. Bye.